I also want to tell you that the policy, healthcare policy that we currently see with this administration is frightening. Let me tell you a story. When I was growing up as a little boy in East St. Louis, Illinois, we were afraid of polio. One of our classmates would go to school healthy in the morning and be paralyzed before dinner. When I was in first grade, my friend disappeared for weeks. I asked people where she went, but they just shook their heads and said polio. When she finally returned, she couldn't walk without heavy leg braces. I'll never forget the agony I saw on her face. For decades, polio ravaged America, killing and paralyzing thousands of people every year. And then, a vaccine was discovered. The Salk vaccine was a miracle. By 1979, polio was eradicated in the United States. A disease that struck fear in the heart of everyone soon became, thank God, a distant memory. We repeated that success earlier this century with diseases like measles and rubella. Unfortunately, those vaccine victories are now under attack by the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert Kennedy Jr. His actions threaten to reverse 50 years of progress in infectious disease treatment and prevention. Let me tell you about the chaos that has occurred at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention since Secretary Kennedy was confirmed. In February, Secretary Kennedy moved to dismiss more than 1,000 CDC staff members. That's 10% of the workforce. This included key members of the agency's pandemic prevention and laboratory safety staff. In August, he fired Dr. Susan Menares from her position as director of the CDC, despite the fact that she'd been nominated by President Trump and confirmed by every Senate Republican just weeks before. Yesterday, Dr. Menares testified before the Senate Health Committee about the circumstances surrounding her firing, and the revelations in her testimony were deeply, deeply troubling. Dr. Menares told the committee that Secretary Kennedy plans to upend our nation's vaccine recommendation schedules this month. You see, the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee meets regularly to make recommendations based on science on what vaccines Americans should receive at various points of their life. States use these recommendations, professional medical recommendations, to develop guidelines for what vaccines our children should receive. Health insurance companies are required to cover the full cost of the recommended vaccines from this panel. Unfortunately, Secretary Kennedy unilaterally fired all the members of the CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee, many of whom were infectious disease and vaccine experts. He fired them all. He replaced them with people who have espoused anti-vaccine views and align with extreme health-related conspiracy theories. This new panel is set to meet today, and I fear they're about to upend decades of progress in preventing unnecessary illness by wiping out recommendations and access to childhood vaccines. Dr. Menares testified yesterday that she was fired for not preemptively agreeing to rubber stamp these new vaccine requirements, absent scientific evidence that changes were warranted. Think about that. Secretary Kennedy fired President Trump's pick to head the CDC because she insisted that the agency's vaccine recommendations be actually backed by science. Many states see this anti-vaccine movement at the highest levels of our government are taking things to an even further extreme. Florida announced it would end most of its vaccine requirements, and other Republican states are likely to follow suit. The rising vaccine skepticism promoted by Secretary Kennedy and the Trump administration will cause a resurgence in preventable disease across America. In Texas, 2 unvaccinated children died from measles earlier this year, the first such deaths in America in 10 years. Louisiana is experiencing its worst whooping cough outbreak in 35 years. More than 30 infants have been hospitalized and many were not vaccinated when the DTaP, Tdap vaccine that could have protected them. Tragically, 2 of these infants have already died. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will be the first Secretary of HHS with a body count. He is a danger to the children of America. Kennedy's onslaught has targeted more than just vaccines. He and President Trump have spearheaded a historic level of dysfunction at the National Institutes of Health. They have frozen medical research funding and fired scientists and researchers. Think about that. This is going to make America great again, firing medical researchers. I've been a supporter of the NIH in all the time I've served in Congress. The research there gives people hope when they're faced with devastating diagnoses. For 10 years, I've been part of a bipartisan task force to raise the NIH research budget. In those 10 years, we increased the budget by more than 60%, raising it from $30 billion to $48 billion today. But Trump and Kennedy proposed budgets for next year eliminates this $18 billion increase in medical research. Every penny of the increase I fought for the last 10 years is gone with this Trump budget. It will mean fewer novel cures and treatments for patients who need them. It'll dramatically reduce research into Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, and they've been suspended because of the Trump-Kennedy cuts. Does anybody believe that America is greater as a nation with less cancer research? I don't. Patients desperate for cure for horrible conditions like glioblastoma are in agony today because President Trump and Secretary Kennedy canceled the research funding they depend on. Secretary Kennedy's cuts will stifle a generation of researchers and jeopardize our medical research infrastructure. We will feel the effects of this rash decision for decades to come. I call on my Republican colleagues to stand up to this public health massacre. Some of the members are doctors or parents themselves who have vaccinated their kids or spent their careers trying to improve our healthcare system. My colleagues know that Secretary Kennedy is unqualified, unhinged, and dangerous. And I hope they will find the courage to join me and speak out against the terrible decisions he's fostering. If they don't, I fear there will be dire consequences if we allow Secretary Kennedy to continue to serve in a role where lives are on the line and he is clearly unqualified. I yield the floor.